Welcome back, my dear friends. Today we will discuss the thrilling story of Vladimir Putin. In the dimly lit alleys of post-war Leningrad, where hunger and hardship were as common as snow in winter, a boy named Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born on October 7, 1952. The Soviet Union was rising from the ashes of World War II, and like many others in his generation, Putin grew up in a shared apartment building, a kommunalka, where multiple families lived behind thin walls, and privacy was a rare luxury. His parents, Maria and Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, were survivors, literally. His father had served in the NKVD during the war and fought against the Nazis, while his mother barely lived through the brutal siege of Leningrad. Their stories of perseverance would shape young Vladimir's worldview. Life was tough, but he was tougher. Putin wasn't the strongest kid in school. In fact, he was often described as quiet, stubborn, and fiercely independent. He had a short temper and a strong desire not to lose at anything. So he turned to judo and sambo, martial arts that didn't just train the body, but the mind. Through discipline, he found control, and through competition, he found confidence. But Putin wasn't just a fighter. He was also intensely curious. A teacher once remembered how he declared as a teenager that he wanted to join the KGB. While most kids dreamed of being astronauts or athletes, Putin had already set his sights on espionage and power. Putin studied law at Leningrad State University, where he came under the influence of his mentor, Anatoly Sobchak, a future reformist politician. After graduation, his long-held dream came true. He joined the KGB, the Soviet Union's elite intelligence agency. The Soviet Union was rising from the ashes of World War II, and like many others in his generation, Putin grew up in a shared apartment building, a kommunalka, where multiple families lived behind thin walls, and privacy was a rare luxury. In 1985, Putin was stationed in Dresden, East Germany. There, he watched as communism slowly began to crack under the pressure of reform and revolution. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Putin called Moscow for guidance. The line was dead. That silence, Moscow not answering in a moment of crisis, would stay with him forever. He returned to Leningrad disillusioned, but not defeated. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and with it, the world Putin had known his entire life vanished. Yet, from the rubble of the USSR, he began to rise. Putin soon joined the administration of Anatoly Sobchak, now the mayor of St. Petersburg. There, he was quiet but competent, known for getting things done. He didn't seek the spotlight, but his efficiency caught the eyes of people in higher places. When Sobchak lost re-election in 1996, Putin moved to Moscow, and things moved fast. Very fast. Within a few years, Putin held multiple high-ranking government positions, and by 1998, he was appointed head of the FSB, the successor to the KGB. A year later, President Boris Yeltsin shocked the world when he announced his resignation on December 31, 1999, and named Vladimir Putin as acting president of Russia. The former spy had become the leader of the largest country on earth. In March 2000, Putin officially won the presidency. Young, calm, and composed, he promised stability in a time when Russians were tired of chaos, corruption, and economic collapse. His tough image, no-nonsense demeanor, and appeal to national pride struck a chord with many. Putin moved quickly to centralize power. He brought the rebellious regions in line, took control of the media, and targeted oligarchs who had gained vast power in the 90s. One by one, powerful businessmen were exiled, jailed, or stripped of their influence. At the same time, the economy began to stabilize. Oil prices soared, and Russia's GDP rose along with public optimism. Putin cultivated an image, strong, athletic, patriotic. He posed shirtless on horseback, played hockey, and flew fighter jets, creating a brand of hyper-masculine leadership that became instantly recognizable around the world. But critics accused him of eroding democracy. Elections became less competitive, the press less free, and opposition voices more endangered. Still, his popularity at home remained strong, especially among older Russians nostalgic for Soviet strength and unity. Russia's constitution limits presidents to 2 consecutive terms. So in 2008, Putin stepped aside and became prime minister, while his close ally, Dmitry Medvedev, became president. But few doubted who was really in charge. In 2012, Putin returned to the presidency amid mass protests in Moscow, accusing him of rigging the election. But again, his support in many parts of the country remained high. Russians saw in him a man who had restored national pride and stood up to the West. In 2014, Putin shocked the world by annexing Crimea from Ukraine after a revolution ousted its pro-Russian president. Western nations called it an illegal land grab. Sanctions followed. Relations with the United States and Europe plummeted. Putin, however, remained defiant. He claimed he was protecting ethnic Russians and correcting a historical injustice. At home, his popularity soared again. For many Russians, it was proof that their country was no longer weak or apologetic. It was back on the world stage. By now, Putin had become one of the world's most recognizable and polarizing figures. He was seen by admirers as a strong, strategic leader who restored Russian strength. Critics, on the other hand, saw him as an authoritarian ruler who crushed dissent and played dangerous geopolitical games. Allegations of election interference, cyber attacks, and support for authoritarian regimes followed him. But so did a kind of mystique, a shadowy operator who always seemed 3 steps ahead of his rivals. In Syria, he supported Bashar al-Assad, re-establishing Russia as a major player in the Middle East. In Africa, Latin America, and Asia, Russian influence grew. Meanwhile, domestic opponents like Alexei Navalny were arrested or pushed into exile. In February 2022, Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, triggering the largest conflict in Europe since World War II. The world watched in disbelief. Sanctions rained down. Russia was cut off from the global economy. Western companies pulled out. But Putin stood firm. He framed the war as a battle for Russia's security and cultural identity, claiming NATO expansion threatened his country's sovereignty. The war dragged on. Thousands died, millions fled. Ukraine resisted fiercely. Inside Russia, dissent was silenced even more harshly. Independent media was shut down. Protests were crushed. But support for Putin, at least among certain segments of the population, held. Vladimir Putin has now led Russia, either as president or prime minister, for over 2 decades. Few modern leaders have held power so long in such a complex global spotlight. He is a man shaped by hardship, war, discipline, and an unshakable belief in Russia's greatness. To some, he is a savior. To others, a strongman. To many, he is both. His story is still being written, with chapters that could shape not just the fate of Russia, but the future of global politics for decades to come. Putin rarely shows emotion. He speaks in calm, clipped tones. He plays chess while others play checkers. And while much of the world speculates on what he will do next, he remains one of the most enigmatic leaders of our time. Whether history will remember him as a brilliant strategist or a ruthless autocrat depends on who writes it and when. But one thing is certain, Vladimir Putin has changed the course of modern history, and the world will feel the impact for generations to come.